areas that that people could otherwise find alternative sources to locate. We do a lot with protecting wildlife habitat. We've got a couple of conservation easements that have been instrumental in protecting steelhead spawning habitat. So steelhead is a fish species that is listed as threatened, and the Idaho Department of Fish and Game has worked with a couple of private landowners that have these really wonderful intact creek systems going through their property to be able to put them into permanent protection and maintain that habitat value. I was actually out on this easement with, I had a student intern working with me from the university, and we were out doing our monitoring, and we heard this bustling in the bushes, and before I knew it, out comes a moose and a calf right in front of us, just down in this riparian corridor. And the landowner said that it's very often that they're using that as basically a transportation corridor that kind of connects them up with more wooded and forested habitat up on Moscow Mountain, and then kind of down into some of the breaks above the Clearwater River. So in addition to the primary species that we were trying to protect, the fish that are living in the stream, we're also having kind of these secondary benefits to other species that are in these core areas, and protecting those lands for habitat values. Since we're in Moscow, and I know you guys are pretty familiar with the community, I thought I'd just share with you a couple of projects that we have done locally that are about protecting open space. And we are having a lot of change to our demographics happen, and just in our 25 years of existence, one of the projects that is probably many of you know about already is the Osprey easement. And this property is a kind of rural oasis in the middle of Moscow. It's right on the corner of D and Mountain View streets. And Maynard and his wife were one of the very first families that we worked with at the Land Trust. And they had protected a farm that they own in another state, but wanted to put some protections in place because they saw kind of how Moscow was projected to grow out in that particular area. And Maynard, who just turned 100 last year, during his community celebration where we were doing a kind of shared dialogue about the changes in rural America, he was talking about how when he first moved to the property in the 1950s, early 1950s, he and his wife Margaret Fosberg moved there, and he was talking about how at that time he was considered far enough out of the city limits that they wouldn't even deliver milk to his home. And so, and now, we see that as sort of like, well, that's, right in the city limit, and so we've got this little urban oasis there. And so this is a picture of the property. This is a 2015 photo, so it's a little dated, and it might be hard to see, but I put little yellow lines around the property. So this is Mountain View, this is D Street, this is the middle school, Moscow Middle School there. And what's interesting is that this is a photograph of the same area from 1992, which really isn't that long ago. I mean, we all remember 1992. Well, I was in high school, so we'll just go there, but that's how it was. And I wasn't here in the community. I came here to go to graduate school. And so, long story short though, let me just go back. I'll show you that again. So here's today, and here's 1992. So quite a bit of change, right? There's a lot that's been happening in terms of growth. And so we've got 6th Street and Itani Drive up here. And so what's interesting is that, that this was really, even in the 90s, relatively kind of on the edge. And and 2015, which isn't a super new image, but it's definitely grown up around it. So we feel like we have been really able to help this family with their vision and goals for protecting this open space that's now available in the community. And here's McDonald Elementary School. So this is where we take the little kids and bring them out, and he's got Paradise Creek that goes right through his property. And then this little piece up here is about that 5 acres of ground that he's worked really, really hard and has done some amazing Palouse Prairie reconstruction work. So there's this little oasis in the middle of in the middle of town. I mentioned the other public access property is this Rabbit Hills Preserve. So it's directly adjacent to the Palouse Clearwater Environmental Institute's campus out there. And so Gail DeSantis lives up on the hill up there, and she describes how she, kind of was seeing these homes marching in, and this piece of property came up for sale, and so she purchased it, and then put a conservation easement on it so that it'll remain open and undeveloped, and then donated it to PCI. So PCI actually owns the property, we hold the easement, and I'll show you just a couple of pictures to kind of give you a context of where this is at. So again, here's an aerial image. So here's the DeSantis. This is Rabbit Hills Preserve. So this is PCI campus right here. So this is the Polk Extension. Here's Moscow Building Supply. So for reference, so you guys know where all of that is. So this is what the property looks like, sort of modern day. And we're really lucky to have PCI be the landowner because they also own this campus here. And so it's kind of creates this contiguous block of green space in our community. And this is what it looked like in 1992. So I'll go back again. So kind of some big changes just in the last little over 30 years. 1992 and modern day. So in terms of communities growing and urban sprawl kind of happening, even in our small community, having these little pockets of green spaces is becoming more and more important to our communities. And just as sort of a caveat, I was going to put a picture in here, but I didn't. But this Britton Lane here, where there's several condos, there's now a little trailhead access that connects up. You can't really, I know you folks probably can't see it back there, but there's a little trail network that goes all the way around Rabbit Hills Preserve. And now there's that new city park that's been developed right here on this. This is a piece of city ground, and they've put in some new play structures there in a parking lot right along the Polk Extension. But lots of great places out there to take your dog for a walk or take some kiddos to if you have visitors in town. So I'll talk just a little bit about the work that we do in Palouse Prairie, and I'll try to wrap it up. Leave lots of time for you guys to ask questions. So a little bit just about Palouse Prairie and protections that we do. So the Palouse Bioregion, this is just sort of the ecological way that we describe this unit. I know it's hard to see this map, but essentially this is the Idaho-Washington border, and this is showing county names. So this up here is Spokane County, this is Whitman County, Benewah County, which is kind of up by Plummer-Worley, Latah County, Nez Perce County, Lewis, Clearwater, Asotin, and then all the way out into Garfield and Columbia counties. So this is kind of the historic range of what was described as the Palouse Bioregion. And as many of you know, we have less than, some experts say less than 1% of the native Palouse Prairie vegetation remaining. And largely it's because of the fact that we have these wonderful, fertile, beautiful soils that underlie those prairies for millennia and created this wonderful rich soil that then essentially just went under the plow after the European settlers arrived in the late 1800s. And so we really don't have very much of it left. We live kind of at the heart of one of the most critically endangered ecosystems in North America. And I've been really fortunate to be able to get out on the Palouse Prairie, and we try to lead some occasional guided hikes up on our preserve so that people can see it firsthand. And if many of you have been up to Kamiak Butte, or places like Steptoe Butte State Park and on the Washington side, those are some of the larger tracts of what's remaining, but there's lots of these little fragmented parcels that just essentially exist somewhat on the eyebrows of the rolling hills, where perhaps the soil was too shallow, too rocky to farm, too steep. So most of the areas that are left are kind of these vistas, these hilltops that really have either a topographical or geographical barrier that kept them from being farmed. And along with that, because the ecosystem is critically endangered, many of the associated plant and animal species are also really, really diminished and very, very rare. One such species is this little plant that's called Spaulding's catchfly. It's not exactly the most beautiful plant. It's kind of not all that impressive, but you can see why it's called catchfly. It has these little hairs on it that essentially bugs kind of get caught up in, and then others are able to come and feed on the plant. And this little plant is designated by the Endangered Species Act as a threatened plant. And so with that comes certain restrictions and guidelines. And so we have been sitting kind of at the core of a larger group that's working on Spaulding's catchfly recovery. And recently a cool thing happened in that just south of Moscow on the Paradise Ridge. So I'm assuming all of you know where Paradise Ridge is, but the butte to the south is called Gormson Butte. It's kind of on the other side of E Road. And the Gormson Butte Paradise Ridge was recently designated as a key conservation area by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So that is a special federal designation, and with it comes a certain amount of federal funding that's available for protections for some of these species. And so in 2015, the Land Trust was really fortunate to get a federal grant through a partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We identified some landowners up on that, up in that key conservation area along Paradise Ridge and Gormson Butte, and found some folks who were willing to put permanent protections on their properties via a conservation easement. And in doing so, we were also able to acquire the Dave Skinner Ecological Preserve as a property that we own. It was sold to us at a bargain sale from a local family who had long roots in the area, but had since kind of moved on and nobody really wanted to come back. So they said, sure, we'll sell it to you. So with all of that kind of under the umbrella of this little plant, we were able to protect about 520 acres is now permanently conserved in that Paradise Ridge Gormson Butte complex. So kind of some cool stuff that happened there. That grant has since kind of sunset, and when the funding goes away, sometimes the momentum is harder to keep going. But we were really excited to work with 4 different landowners to protect 4 key properties up there and then purchase the nature reserve. So this is just a photograph of the Palouse Prairie up on, this is up on top of Gormson Butte. So looking back this way, this is Paradise Ridge. So from the south side. So so Moscow would be another ridge over, and then Moscow Mountains in the background. So Gormson Butte has a some really lovely native Palouse Prairie up there. And then the landowner that we're working with also is working with partners with not only the Lake Hostile and Water Conservation District and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NRCS, but has been doing a really, really wonderful job reconstructing some prairie adjacent to the remnant. So kind of expanding out from where just the smaller remnant remained and having a broader impact of Palouse Prairie conservation up in that area. And there's a lot of other really wonderful things that have happened with Spalding's catchfly habitat recovery as a result of this